Okay, welcome to this Section 9 Anthology Analysis for A-Level Religious Studies Ethics, and this is Wilcockson's anthology piece. Let's read it. On the other hand, some argue that it's a doctor's professional duty to use whatever medicines are available, regardless of the situation. A response to this might be to think in terms of proportion as an alternative variation of extraordinary means. Proportion is a well-established principle in natural law tradition, which may be applied to medicine without compromising the obligation of the doctor to treat his or her patient. This enables each situation to be seen individually, so that what might be considered proportionate to achieve good ends is contingent on the needs of the patient and even the resources of the doctor. The issue is particularly complex with non-competent patients. For instance, a very handicapped baby, for example, someone who's anaphylactic, or with a major part of the brain missing, might be considered so ill that no amount of surgery would improve their condition significantly. In this case, the doctor might then prescribe nursing care only. The baby should be kept warm and fed. It is proportionate to their needs, knowing the baby will die soon. So, what shall we do and say about this? So he says, on the other hand, some argue, well, that it's the doctor's professional duty to use whatever medicines available regardless of the situation. I think this is an interesting approach in that it's not a good basis to do medicine, to cite in the emotion of families. Clearly, who's in mind here are the families of very ill children who believe their children should have disproportionate, extraordinary means, whatever the cost, however difficult, used for their children. And in a way, parents should have that right to make that case. That's as good parenting should be. So, for example, the children with cystic fibrosis, their very high-profile political campaigns that's called Medicines for the Many. In the Medicines for the Many, this has now reached a level of politics. It's a Labour Party document that suggests all forms of medicine should be available. So, no matter how expensive, and it becomes a political issue because it's about money. To use whatever means, regardless of the expense, the availability, the manpower needed, and so on. So we set up something obviously difficult, really difficult. So then he talks of proportion. Let's give it a new color. As an alternative to extraordinary means. That's an interesting phrase and use. Proportion is a well-established principle in natural law tradition. So let's think about this term proportion, proportionalism. Remember our work in natural moral law and the modern version of it, that is Bernard Hose's hybrid of natural moral law, which is more often a deontological theory with a kind of using situation ethics, a teleological ethic. So Hose's great maxim was, it's never right to go against the principle unless there is a proportionate reason which would justify it, the kind of ontic goods that he talks about, justice and so on. Distinction between an evil moral act, so he breaks these down, an act that it does evil but is moral, a surgeon cutting a person to make them better is an evil act, but moral act in that sense, and a pre-moral ontic evil. an act that is just evil. So the distinction between a good act, an act that follows a moral rule, and a right act, an act that is not necessarily a good act but creates the lesser of two evils. Proportionality is based or influenced by, here it is, agape, the situation ethics. In natural law, certain acts are intrinsically evil, such as lying or stealing. However, the intention is important. For example, killing one child in the conjoined twins case to save the other. Killing is intrinsically evil, so it's as he would say, an evil act. However, you can allow one child to die to save the other, as in a kind of double effect. Hose believes the act of killing the weaker child in the case would be an ontic evil, but not a moral evil. Proportionalism is considered to be a hybrid between situation ethics and natural law. As such, it may be considered to have positive aspects of each theory. The rules of natural law are a useful guide to morality, whereas the flexibility of situation ethics allows you to break the rules if there's a good reason to do so. So it seems Wilcockson has in mind this in Natural Moral Law, Modern Thinking by Bernard Hose. Now, it's worth going on a little bit with this and thinking about some contemporary writers on proportionalism. Daniel McGuire, C. McGuire, is a Catholic moral philosopher, and he puts forward a proportionalist, an effectively proportionalist position. He holds that life is a basic but not absolute good. Not interesting. Second, one is bound to respect life, but no one is bound to prolong it in all circumstances. So McGuire argues that issues such as euthanasia can be handled adequately within the broad context of a complete ethical theory. The special task of ethics is to bring sensitivity, reflection, and method to the way people decide the sort of persons they ought to be and the sort of actions they ought to perform. The first step is to discover the moral objective. This is done by asking reality-revealing questions such as what, why, how, who, where, when, and what if, and what else. And only when this is done can the evaluations using a rational analysis, feelings, and creative imagination group experience be undertaken. So, McGuire's central question, his version of proportionalism, is can it be moral and should it be legal to take direct action to terminate life in circumstance? And McGuire answers yes. We must in all cases await the good pleasure of biochemical and organic factors and allow these to determine the time and manner of death. The answer is no. Can the will of God regarding a person's death be manifested only through the collapse of the sick or wounded organs? The answer is no. Number 4, can the will of God be discovered through human sensitivity and reasoning? The answer is yes. Could there be circumstances in which it would be reasonable, therefore moral, to terminate life through either positive action or calculated benign neglect? And his answer, shockingly for a Catholic moralist, is yes. That's quite incredible. In deciding on death, McGuire rejects the idea of a kind of fatalistic theism which forbids expanding the human dominion over dying because the time of death is organized by God alone. This implies that human beings are God's property. If we should not intervene in nature, then all medicine would be immoral. There is no essential difference between ending life and preserving death. This is a radical view, isn't it, for a Catholic? McGuire maintains that we have underestimated our dominion over life and death. We've been given the responsibility to discover the good and choose it, even when the good in question is death. Terminating a life under certain circumstances may be a good, so long as a greater good in physical life is being served. McGuire therefore challenges the absolute and exceptionless character often given to the principle, thou shalt not kill. So now many Catholics respond and attack McGuire as a Catholic moralist. He defends his very positive, almost quality of life viewpoint, um, position on death against the objections of no direct killing of innocent life, as in the 1980 Catholic doctrine in the Magisteria principle, on the basis that his understanding of the source and function limits of moral principles, the principle that there should be no direct killing of innocent life, is valid only most of the time, but in the specific circumstances of the patient's moral situation, there we go, situation ethics, the principle may not apply and would have to yield the principle of achieving a good death, unless someone holds that continuing living in any condition is always preferable. He or she will have to enter into the weighing up of proportional values. He accepts that making judgment between conflicting values not easy, and it may be mistaken, but he maintains that the whole purpose of ethical reflection is to achieve a finer sensitivity to the values in conflict and make possible options less arbitrary. Therefore, euthanasia can sometimes be a legitimate moral choice. That's a radical position for a Catholic to take. Probably, is it still even Catholicism? It sounds very much like situation ethics. It's such a hybrid with situation ethics to be more situation ethics than natural moral law, it seems to me. What do you think? So let's just have a quick look at the rest of this before we bring this into land, this video. Wilcockson says, without compromising the obligation, what's a doctor's obligation to treat his or her patient? What is the duty of the doctor? What's in practice, this means the doctor has a duty to use any resources at their disposal to try and prolong life. Might not seem realistic in some circumstances, as each situation needs to be seen individually. Well, that is very much a situational ethical perspective. Wilcockson refers to each according to the needs of the patient and even the resources of the doctor. And those are two very different things. Wilcockson notes this, and using proportionate approach brings what he calls a common sense focus to these situations. Well, which that's the question. Which proportional approach? Bernard Hose's pretty much still natural moral law approach, or this other approach that we've just been reading about by McGuire, pretty much is situation ethics with a natural moral law label on it. So it's complex. It's complex for who the quality of life. What does he say? This is particularly complex with non-competent patients. Well, again, who finds the complexity? It's the people who believe in the quality of life. Sanctity of life really is very simple. Don't kill people. It begins to get complex when we talk about things like autonomy. When we ask if the patient is happy but not competent, the happy person who's got dementia, should we kill them if they're perfectly happy? Even if they've given us an advance directive to do so, but has previously, given consent. Really? This is perhaps shows the fallacy of Singer's reliance on autonomy, the weakness of autonomy as the premier ethical starting point in the battle of medical ethical principles. And we're going to come back to this over and over. And so we get this, lastly in this section, we get this example. A very handicapped baby for somebody who's anaphylactic. And you would say nursing care only. The baby should be kept warm and fed. Well, proportionate to their needs. Well, it's fair enough. But that's not a difficult issue. That's not even a complex issue. What would you do if you were the doctor and the anaphylactic baby Encephalactic baby. Is it such a particularly complex issue? Well, it is with some non-competent patients, I think. The person who is given an advance directive to die, as we saw in look at the take it further section of the example lady who's very happy but given an advance directive to say to kill her if she had dementia. That's complex there. Is this that complex? A baby who's disabled, shouldn't we look after the baby? If you find it complex, well, there you go. So this was section 9.